I used to believe in unshakable bonds. Lena had been my best friend for as long as I could remember, and Ethan, well, he was the love of my life. The kind of love that felt effortless, like breathing. The three of us were always together, laughing over late-night dinners, sharing secrets over glasses of wine, planning trips that felt like pieces of a perfect future. If trust had a shape, a color, a sound, it was them, my constants, my safe place. But safety is an illusion, isn't it? It was a random moment, something so ordinary it shouldn't have mattered. My phone buzzed, a message I wasn't meant to see. Or maybe it was fate, the universe yanking me out of my oblivion. A name I knew too well, words I could barely process. My heart didn't race, it didn't break, not yet. It just stopped. I should have confronted them. I should have screamed, cried, demanded an explanation. But standing there, staring at the proof of their betrayal, I felt something else instead. A quiet, chilling clarity. They didn't deserve an outburst. They deserved something much worse. So I smiled, took a deep breath, and made my decision. I replayed the moment over and over, but not in the way most would. No tears, no shaking hands, just observation. How long had it been going on? How many times had they smiled in my face, pretending? The thought should have shattered me. Instead, it sharpened me. That night, I sat across from Ethan at dinner, watching him, really watching him, for the first time in years. The way he twirled his fork absent-mindedly, the slight furrow of his brow when he was deep in thought, things I once adored now felt foreign, a stranger at my table. Lena's laugh echoed through my phone later that night, spilling through the speaker like a song I no longer liked. How many times had she lied, looking me in the eye, swearing loyalty? I didn't say a word. I didn't let them see the shift in me. If they could pretend, so could I. But unlike them, I wasn't careless. No suspicious glances, no sudden coldness. Just Sophie, the same loving girlfriend, the same devoted best friend. The only difference? Now I had a plan. And they had no idea. The first few days were the hardest. Not because I was hurting. No, that part had settled into something colder, something calculated. It was the act that required effort. Smiling when I wanted to sneer, kissing Ethan when the thought of his lips made my skin crawl. Laughing with Lena when all I wanted was to wrap my hands around her throat, not in rage, but in control. But I was careful. I played my role flawlessly. I let Ethan hold me at night, let Lena send me her little voice messages like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I studied them. Their patterns, their tells. The way Ethan's hand lingered on his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. The way Lena hesitated just a second too long when I asked about her weekend. They thought they were being discreet. They thought I was blind. Fools. I let them have their secrets, let them sneak around, whisper in the dark, thinking they were getting away with it. Because that's what made this fun. Letting them believe they were winning. Letting them build a tower of lies so high they'd never see the moment I set it on fire. And when the time was right, I'd make sure they burned in it. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was almost amusing. How betrayal could sharpen you, make you see the world differently. Everything felt clearer now, every movement deliberate. This wasn't about anger. Anger was reckless, sloppy. No, this was about precision and patience. I started small. A lingering pause in conversation, just enough to make Ethan wonder what I wasn't saying. A carefully placed sigh when Lena mentioned his name, subtle, but enough to plant the tiniest splinter of doubt. I made sure they caught these moments, little flickers of something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Nothing obvious, just a whisper, a suggestion. Then, one evening, as Ethan and I sat curled up on the couch, I leaned into him, running my fingers lazily along his arm. Lena's been acting a little off lately, don't you think? I mused, keeping my tone light, almost casual. I felt his muscles tense for just a fraction of a second before he forced a chuckle. What do you mean? He asked, too quick, too eager to dismiss it. I shrugged, pressing my cheek against his shoulder, feigning thoughtfulness. I don't know, just little things. She's been secretive, distracted, almost like she's hiding something. I sighed, letting the words hang in the air before changing the subject. The damage was done, the seed was planted, and Ethan, whether he realized it or not, had already started watering it. Ethan didn't say much that night, but I could see it, the way his fingers tightened around his glass, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly. He thought he was subtle, but I knew him too well. Doubt was creeping in, curling around his thoughts like ivy. And I wasn't done. The next day it was Lena's turn. We met for lunch at our usual spot, the kind of place where the air smelled like fresh coffee and familiarity. She smiled at me, all warmth and ease, and for a brief second, I marveled at how well she wore the mask. Then again, so did I. As we sipped our drinks, I played my next card. Ethan's been a little distant lately, I said, keeping my voice light, as if I were simply making conversation. I stirred my coffee, watching her reaction from the corner of my eye. She blinked, tilting her head. Distant how? I sighed, giving her a small, hesitant smile. I don't know. Distracted, secretive, like he's hiding something. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. But that's ridiculous, right? I mean, Ethan would never. I trust him completely. It was a perfect performance. The slight doubt in my voice, the way I dismissed my own concerns, inviting her to reassure me. And, just as I expected, she took the bait. Of course he wouldn't, she said quickly, a little too quickly. I just nodded, taking another sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the rim. It didn't take long for the cracks to start forming. Just days after our conversation, Ethan seemed different, quieter, more distracted. He wasn't the type to voice his worries, but I could see them, simmering beneath the surface. When Lena texted him, his jaw would tighten ever so slightly before he turned the screen away. When she laughed at something over dinner, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. But the real proof? He started watching her. The way she moved, the way she spoke, as if he were seeing her for the first time and wondering what he had missed before. And Lena was starting to feel it too. I could tell by the way she hesitated before mentioning his name, the way her gaze flickered when I casually asked if she and Ethan had talked that day. I kept feeding them carefully chosen words, a slow and steady poison disguised as concern. Lena's been really busy lately, I mused one evening, stretching out beside Ethan. I hardly see her anymore. A simple statement, but one that left room for interpretation. Later, with Lena, I played the same game. Ethan's been lost in his head lately, I confided, shaking my head, like he's got something weighing on him. I keep wondering, what if it's another woman? I forced a nervous laugh, as if the thought was absurd, as if I hadn't already made sure the idea would take root. And it did. I could see it in her hesitation, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She tried to brush it off, but the doubt was there, just like it was with Ethan. They thought they were playing me. But the real game? That was mine. It was almost too easy. Ethan and Lena were unraveling right before my eyes, and all I had to do was sit back and watch. The once effortless chemistry between them had turned into hesitation, careful glances, unspoken questions hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The thrill of the affair had been replaced with something else, paranoia. And I had made sure of it. Ethan started checking his phone more often, but not in the way he used to. Now, every notification made his fingers twitch, his expression tightening just for a second before he forced a casual response. I caught him glancing at Lena more than once, studying her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. And Lena? She had started keeping her phone face down, tucking it into her bag instead of leaving it out like she used to. Subtle, but telling. They didn't know it yet, but I had become the whisper in their heads. Every glance, every word, every innocent moment was now tainted by doubt. I could see it in the way Lena hesitated before responding to his messages, the way Ethan seemed to weigh his words before speaking to her. The trust they had built, the very thing that made their betrayal possible, was slipping through their fingers. And I wasn't done. Not yet. The tension between them was almost tangible now, like a thread pulled too tight, on the verge of snapping. Ethan had started questioning things, subtly at first, but it was growing. He'd glance at Lena's phone when she wasn't looking, his jaw tightening when she laughed at a text. He'd mention plans just to see if she hesitated before confirming them. And Lena? She was feeling it too. I could tell by the way she'd pause before answering my casual questions about Ethan, how she'd shift in her seat, suddenly unsure of the man she once snuck around with so easily. She had started watching him too, studying his late replies, the way he'd disappear into his thoughts. I made sure to fan the flames. A simple message left unsent on my phone, one I accidentally let Ethan glimpse. "We can't keep this up much longer. He's starting to notice." It was vague enough to mean anything, but his mind would twist it into something bigger. And with Lena, I planted the same uncertainty, a passing remark while scrolling through my messages, sighing as I locked my screen. Ethan's been so distant. Sometimes I wonder if he's hiding something from me. She didn't say anything, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The question she was too afraid to ask herself. They had been so sure of themselves, so sure of their secret. But now the cracks were showing. I could feel it coming apart at the seams. Ethan was restless, his patience thinning by the day. He wasn't just watching Lena anymore, he was testing her. He'd ask offhanded questions, ones that seemed innocent but were meant to trip her up. "Who were you with yesterday? You never texted back." "You've been really busy lately, huh?" His voice was light, but his eyes, sharp, searching. Lena, on the other hand, had started withdrawing. She didn't laugh as much, didn't text as freely. She'd glance at Ethan when she thought he wasn't looking, uncertainty clouding her expression. I knew what she was thinking. What if I was right? What if Ethan wasn't the loyal, devoted boyfriend I had made him out to be? What if he was capable of cheating, just like she was? I had been careful, strategic. But now, I didn't even have to push. They were doing the work for me. Ethan started checking her phone when she left the room, scrolling through her messages like a man desperate for confirmation. Lena caught him once, and the look on her face was priceless. Part shock, part guilt, part fear. She didn't confront him, though, because deep down, she knew she had no right to. Their little love affair, built on secrets and stolen moments, was turning into something else entirely. Suspicion, resentment, paranoia. And soon, it wouldn't just be cracks anymore. It would be collapse. The breaking point wasn't a slow unraveling anymore. It was a full-blown implosion. It started with something small, as these things always do. A careless comment, a poorly timed question. But by the time I arrived at our usual dinner gathering, the tension between them was suffocating. Ethan barely looked at Lena, and Lena, well, she looked like a woman sitting on a live grenade. I poured myself a glass of wine, watching them from the corner of my eye. They were quiet, too quiet. Ethan's fingers drummed against the table, his jaw tight. Lena's smile was forced, her laughter a little too brittle. They were unraveling, just as I had planned. And then, as if on cue, Ethan snapped. "Who were you texting earlier?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, sharp enough to slice through the air. Lena blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "Your phone. You've been glued to it all night. Something I should know?" Lena scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, Ethan, don't start." But her voice wavered, just enough for him to hear it, just enough for me to notice. I sipped my wine, saying nothing. This was their moment. I had simply set the stage. Lena's attempt at dismissal didn't work. Ethan wasn't letting it go. "I'm serious," he pressed, his voice low, controlled, but carrying the weight of suspicion. "You've been different lately, secretive." He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Or is that just me?" Lena bristled, forcing a laugh, but it lacked any real amusement. You're being ridiculous. She reached for her drink, but I caught the way her fingers trembled slightly. She knew. She could feel it, the way the walls were closing in. Ethan didn't back down. Am I? He challenged, his jaw tight. Because I'm starting to wonder if there's something you're not telling me. Lena's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. The smallest crack in her composure, and Ethan saw it. He pounced. Who is it? His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. I set my glass down, watching as Lena's face twisted between anger and panic. She was trapped, but she wouldn't go down without a fight. You're accusing me? She snapped, pushing back in her chair. That's rich, Ethan. Maybe you should ask yourself the same damn question. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Ethan laughed, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of bitter, humorless chuckle that comes when the truth is too ugly to ignore. That's your defense? He scoffed, shaking his head. Turn it around on me? Classic. Lena's eyes flashed with something raw, something desperate. You're the one acting different, she shot back. Distracted, cold, like you're hiding something. Her voice wavered at the end, betraying the confidence she was trying so hard to fake. Ethan leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. Maybe I should be hiding something. Maybe I should have had my own little secret on the side. His words were venomous, dripping with accusation. But it was more than that. It was a confession wrapped in denial. Lena's face paled. What the hell does that mean? Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. And that's when it happened, the moment I had been waiting for. The moment their tempers shattered whatever fragile hold they had left on their deceit. I know about the affair, Ethan spat. Lena's breath hitched. For the first time, she had no words, and that was my cue. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of Ethan's words settle between us. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Lena's face was frozen, caught somewhere between shock and desperation, while Ethan sat rigid, his hands clenched into fists on the table. And me? I just smiled. They didn't notice at first. They were too consumed with each other, too lost in the wreckage of their own destruction. But then, as if drawn by some unseen force, their eyes flickered to me. Ethan, confused. Lena, desperate. And that's when I let it slip. The smallest, quietest laugh. Lena's head snapped toward me. What? Her voice faltered. I met her gaze, then Ethan's, tilting my head slightly. Oh, I already knew, I said simply. I took my time, savoring the way their expressions crumbled. I was just waiting for you to destroy yourselves. Lena's lips parted, but no words came out. Ethan's face twisted in something between disbelief and horror. The realization hit them like a slow, creeping sickness. They hadn't just been caught. They had been played. And I had won. Ethan was the first to react, his confusion morphing into anger. You knew? His voice was sharp, but underneath there was something else, something wounded. He had expected tears, maybe even a slap. What he hadn't expected was me sitting here, calm, composed, in complete control. I shrugged, swirling the last bit of wine in my glass. Of course I knew. I glanced at Lena, watching as her eyes darted between me and Ethan, searching for an escape. Did you really think you were being careful? I let out a soft chuckle, shaking my head. You two were never as clever as you thought. Lena's breathing was uneven, her hands trembling as she reached out as if she could somehow undo this. Sophie, please! I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Don't. Just don't. My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, cold and final. You lost the right to explain the moment you decided to betray me. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply, his frustration mounting. So what was this, huh? A game? Some kind of twisted revenge? I tilted my head, considering his words. Not a game, I corrected. A lesson. I leaned forward, letting my next words slice through the space between us. You two took everything I believed in and shattered it. I just returned the favor. The silence that followed was delicious. Lena was shaking now, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Sophie, please, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. I never meant... I laughed, shaking my head. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. Don't insult me by pretending it was anything else. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, the power in it. But here's the thing, Lena. You weren't just my best friend. You were my sister in every way that mattered. I exhaled, letting my voice drop lower, more lethal. And you still did this. Ethan was watching me now, his expression unreadable. I could see the wheels turning in his head, searching for a way to twist this in his favor. Typical. He had always been good at talking his way out of things, but not this time. I leaned in, leveling my gaze at both of them. You know what the worst part is? I asked, letting the question linger. I could have screamed, cried, made a scene, but why should I? That would have given you the satisfaction of knowing you meant enough to break me. I straightened, smoothing my hands down my dress. Instead, I let you break yourselves. Lena's lips parted, but nothing came out. Ethan just sat there, stunned, as the full weight of my words sank in. And then I turned and walked away. The night air was crisp as I stepped outside, each breath feeling lighter, freer. Behind me, they were still sitting there, motionless, speechless, drowning in the wreckage I had left behind. It was fitting, really. They had set fire to my trust, and in the end, they were the ones left choking on the smoke. I reached into my bag, pulling out my phone. My fingers hovered over Ethan's contact, then Lena's. One last moment of consideration, and then, with the simplest motion, I blocked them both. No parting words, no second chances, just silence. The universe, however, had a sense of humor. Just as I slid my phone back into my pocket, it buzzed, one last, desperate message from an unknown number. Please, just talk to me. I didn't need to check who it was. It didn't matter. A slow smile spread across my lips as I hovered over the notification. Then, with the same ease that I had erased them from my life, I deleted the message. No response, no closure, because that was my final move, leaving them exactly where they left me, with nothing. And as I walked away, I had never felt more in control.